Hello, thank you again for clicking on. Just going to do just very brief talk on toxic masculinity, and it's mostly my understanding of toxic masculinity. Infuriatingly, I think this is the fourth time I've tried this video, and I'm feeling really, really overwhelmed a little bit with this because my experience is I have come across so many people demonstrating toxic masculinity, and it's quite frustrating that I suppose that they're not aware, but that's my stuff. And as I've been doing the videos, I've been drifting into these anecdotes and things like that. Just have frustrated me so much about people. So hopefully this is the one that gets made. So toxic masculinity, and I don't agree that the toxic masculinity is only exclusive to men. But for this video, I will relate to men, but it is equally relatable to women. Because if you consider the animus, male, female, masculine, feminine of the person, we have both male and female in us, and we are capable of change. I had episodes through my life where I was, I don't know what you call it, toxically masculine, but I demonstrated toxic masculinity a number of times through my life. And for a huge part, I was aware. I was very aware, but I felt terrible about it. So there is that kind of conflict in your body. You kind of know this is wrong or something, that kind of way. So, and if I can take you back in time to what it is, how toxic masculinity may develop in an individual. So we're going to take the little boy who is upset at home. Maybe his toy broke, and he goes to the mommy or the daddy and says, look, my toy's broke, and he's crying. And this activates something in the mommy or daddy, and they start to get really uncomfortable with this show of emotion over what they assume to be a stupid thing. And they go, oh look, that's silly to be crying. Don't be crying about that. Boys don't cry. Don't cry about that. And the message that child says is that they're wrong for feeling upset. So they learn it very early. And then, as we talked about the interjected values, this becomes part of them. So they grow up with this. The boy grows up with this idea that it's wrong to show weakness and it's wrong to cry. So when they reach a point where something in their life is emotional, that they're going to cry, they don't feel they can. There's a conflict here. They're struggling with themselves. They don't think they can. So how do they demonstrate it? Well, they can demonstrate it through anger, which is a shield. So it's this protection. I always imagine it as we putting on overcoats, and this is a protection to hide me. By the time they get to adulthood, they're wearing so many overcoats that they're just seeping out of every pore toxic masculinity. And how it then manifests is and I'm going to take, and I don't mean to manage up bash, but my experience has been in management. Toxic masculinity in an environment where it's predominantly male managers, you have toxic masculinity, and the manager at the top, who is as equally vulnerable as that little boy who had a broken toy, but is not able to show that at this stage. When someone doesn't do what he demands they do in the time frame they demand, he's then shown they don't respect you. You need to stand up to them. And then he has to go down and say, you have to do what I tell you to do. I'm in charge of you. And I've had that meeting. I've had that meeting with that manager where a manager stood up in a meeting and started shouting down at me with his finger like this. How you break that cycle is you take the power away from that manager. The manager in that situation, that manager is not managing, they're bullying. And the only power a bully has is what you give them. So my thing is to say, when a manager talks to you in any other way than respectfully, you leave, excuse yourself, put your coat on and walk out. You are not there to be spoken to like that. So that's your part in this. The toxic manager who's demonstrating this child has come out and needs to defend itself, does not want to be vulnerable and has to show everyone how strong they are. That child needs to be hugged and held and showing that, look, it's okay. The people that taught you it was wrong to feel your feelings, not that they were wrong, but it's what they did, the best thing they knew at the time. It's how they knew how to cope. And the same thing was done to them, and so on and so on. We need people strong enough to break the cycle. We need managers to go, look, I'm really struggling here. I am not managing the way, I don't believe for a second, I really don't believe for a second, a manager gets into management to bully people and to control people and to make people cry and make people commit suicide and make people leave their jobs and be unemployed and have no money to feed their families. I actually do not believe that a manager does that for that reason. I believe a manager does that because they have somewhere in them they feel they can manage, they can do a good job, and they have some skill set that they think can fit in here. But when they get into a situation like that, this little boy, this vulnerable self comes up and shows, well, I can't be shown to be weak. I'm going to say it to you, managers. Some of my best managers in my life were the ones who showed me they could be weak and they could be vulnerable and they could be sensitive and they could be sad and they could be emotional. And I have the greatest respect for them. And if I have the greatest respect for them, a lot of people I know, everyone, let's say everyone, would have the greatest respect for them. Nobody wants to be shouted at and talked down to. But you'll still be a bloody good manager if you're able to talk to a person and cooperate and communicate and say, well, let's talk about how we can move on from here. And that's it. That's not showing toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity is the person, the male, the female, who's making demands of you, who won't show weakness, who's, afraid, they won't cry, they won't, they bully you and they'll push you away because you've seen something in them or you've brought something up in them. So I suppose my point is that the toxic manager is as vulnerable as the person that they're bullying, but they don't want you to know that. All right, that's a bit scary for the manager if the manager's watching this. I actually can see you. I can see the child. I've had a meeting with managers where I can see the child sitting in front of me. And I've had meetings where the manager nearly cried. I've actually had meetings where a manager did cry because I was able to expose that child, that vulnerable self. And I had another manager ask me to leave that manager alone, which showed me their sensitive side. All right, so I know managers aren't intentionally out there to harm people. It just happens. It's happened, and it's just going to get worse unless we pull it back in and observe ourselves and say, well, why am I such an angry? You couldn't be happy going home after bullying people into tears. You couldn't be happy with your weekend off thinking, how many lives have I destroyed this week? Or look at all them people leaving the job because of me. You couldn't be. And if you are, you're a psychopath. You are a psychopath. That's just it. You have no feeling. You can't feel. But if you're feeling vulnerable and you're feeling scared and you're acknowledge it. Acknowledge it. Acknowledge the fact that you need to improve at your job. You want to improve at your job. And if you improve at your job and you become able to access this part of yourself who's this vulnerable self, this child, and say to that child, if you can visualize that child, say to that child, it wasn't your fault. It's still not your fault. It doesn't make what you're doing right, but it's still not your fault because you were taught wrong. Now you're the adult. It's time now to stop managing from a child perspective and start bringing the adult into a management position and speak to your staff as equals, not as children. They're not your children. They're not under you. They're equal to you. You have a management skill. Talk to them, not at them. So I hope it's helped, and I hope I've reached somebody out there who is capable of change, and it takes a huge amount of courage and a huge amount of work to actually accept the fact that maybe I am wrong. Maybe what I said to that person was wrong. And even a bigger thing, if a manager comes back and says to a person, listen, I was wrong there the last time, the world's not going to explode. Like, The sky's not going to fall in on you. Apologise. Say you're not the manager you want to be. Say you're trying your hardest. People have a lot more respect for you. Stop leaving people in corridors and tears. Stop having people give out about you. Wouldn't it be nice if everyone could turn around and say, I like that fella? And I've actually seen it. I've seen it myself with my own eyes. I had a manager once who was that, walked from a very toxic young place and was a bit of a sod. And over time, I spoke to him. And it was nothing to do with me, but as I was speaking to him over time, I could see a change in him. And whatever happened in him, he'd done incredible work on himself and noticed something in himself. And he became the opposite. Now, he has been hugely supportive of people in the job of mental health, but I've also seen that he has also, in his toxic masculine place, has destroyed some people. So the reality of it is, there's a bit here of repair to do as well. You know, it's like, well, I've done damage here, so maybe I need to go back and say, I need to repair this. If you think of the 12 steps for alcoholics, the first thing is to realise that I've done something that was out of my control. It's been out of your control. Let's say that it's been out of your control. You didn't know. Now you know you have no excuse. Then you have to go and make amends to the people you've harmed if you can. You know what I mean? So if you apply it to something like that, and honestly, if you want to trust me, it will work. People will respect you a lot more and they'll do a lot more for you. And I'm going to say it to you genuinely. I know it hasn't been your fault. It hasn't made it any easier for me because I've thought that person that presented to me was horrible. And I know people that wanted to kill that person. But the reality is that person is a vulnerable child. So we've been ruled by vulnerable children and we'll be governed by vulnerable children. And we need to stop. Managers need to stop and start being the adult in the room and start to treat their staff as equals. So I thought it was ending this a few minutes ago, but it went on. But anyway, thank you very much for listening again to my ramblings, and I'll talk to you soon.